Okay, hey, we're gonna knock out chapter 3 here, looking at the different, I suppose, different settlement patterns or different uses of the land in North America, right? And so when we're looking at this, um, the first permanent settlement in North America is going to be St. Augustine in Florida. It's going to be a Spanish settlement. It's originally founded in 1565, and really the only purpose of St. Augustine at that point was to protect the gold and silver ships that are leaving out of the Caribbean and out of Latin America. And so if we go back to this time frame, this is going to be the time frame of the privateers. It's also gonna kind of trip into the period of the actual pirates that are gonna roll around in the Caribbean, Johnny Depp and all that stuff is well, Disney does a great job of fictionalizing it. It does take place, right? And so the seaport is of St. Augustine is a place for the Spanish to port or to have a naval force to protect their shipping. In 1586, Sir Francis Drake attacks the city and burns it down, right? And then about 100 years later, in 1697 or 1695, the Spanish build, um, excuse me, a stone fort. It's still there. You can go visit it. It's on the east coast of Florida. It's a beautiful. St. Augustine's a beautiful city, and there's the fort, right? Spain in North America. Now, Spain has taken tons of gold and silver out of South America, Latin America, the Caribbean. We've already kind of talked about the fact that North America doesn't have these precious metal mines that are available to Spain. And so, one of the main focuses of the Spanish in North America is going to be spreading the Catholic faith. And so, Spain is going to set up major uh, missionaries, missions throughout the American Southwest. These are going to be towns that you're going to be familiar with today. They're going to be Santa Fe and Los Angeles and San Diego and San Antonio, right? And when they do set up these places, the priests are going to focus on the young to try to, convert them over to the religion, which is going to anger some of the native parents. It's going to lead to some violent outbreak. There's a picture of a missionary church of the Spanish. And one of the first places you're going to see a revolt is the Pueblo revolt, right? The Pueblo leaders around Santa Fe are going to revolt against the Spanish, and you're going to see a set of circumstances that are going to repeat itself multiple times. The Native Americans are going to attack the Europeans when the Europeans are not prepared, and they're going to be victorious. So in the initial wave of violence, the natives are going to be successful. The Europeans are going to regroup and then come in greater numbers, and they're going to, you know, devastate the Native Americans in there. And so we're going to see that in this Pueblo revolt, right? Like the Pueblos are going to kill about 400 Spaniards, and then the Spanish are going to they come back. The Pueblo actually relocate at one point all the way up into Kansas, and the Spanish come and get them. So you can actually go to liberal Kansas today and see some of the ruins of the Pueblo settlements in Kansas there, right? The Dutch and the French are going to be another group, two different groups that are going to that are going to work in North America. Um, and their focus is not going to be on gold and silver or tobacco or agriculture or anything. The Dutch and the French are going to focus almost primarily on the fur trade. And so what that's going to do is that's going to bring a lot of single French and Dutchmen to the American, excuse me, to the American colonies that are going to focus on trade with the Native Americans. Both the Dutch and the French are going to have very good relationships with the Native Americans. The French are going to settle along the St. Lawrence River, which is that border between the American New England states and Canada, and the Dutch are going to settle in modern day New York. One of the interesting things, the Dutch only bring about 9,000 colonists during this time frame, and so it's a very, very small population. They're all focused on making money, right? Because of that labor shortage, the Dutch West India Company is going to start to import slaves to work in the harbors of New York, right? And so the Dutch are going to be one of the first groups in North America. Slaves are going to come into America. Slavery is going to be introduced into North America in 1619, but the Dutch are really going to be the first group to devote large amounts of energy and wealth into importing enslaved labor. The Dutch are also going to welcome non-Dutch settlers into New York, and so New York is going to be one of the first melting pots of America. You're going to see the English and the Germans and the Swedes and the Danes all come and settle in New York. And eventually, the English population in New York is going to exceed the number of Dutch, and that's going to lead to the English reclaiming the area of New York, right? It's not until Quebec is settled in I don't know, the first half of the 1600s that the French actually have a permanent settlement in North America, right? The French are typically, again, they're going to be single dudes that are trapping up and down the St. Lawrence River. They're going to intermarry into Native American tribes. And their focus again is going to be on for getting as many fur pelts as they possibly can, shipping them back to France, and making tons of money, right? Um, you know, like the Spanish, the French are also going to try to convert some of the natives to Catholicism. And the way that they're going to do that is they're not going to necessarily build these huge missions and encourage Native American populations to come and visit the missions, but they're going to send out they're going to send out the Jesuits, and the Jesuits were part of this religious order that was created after the Reformation, which we talked about in chapter 2. Um, to kind of be more of I'm gonna say they're almost like the elite special forces, the Catholic religion. Like they would go out and they would in Europe they would administer the mass in places that were controlled by Protestants. The Jesuits also spent a lot of time establishing universities and whatnot. And so the Jesuits are going to come over to America and they're going to go out into the American wilderness at that point and try to spread the Catholic faith to Native Americans. In fact, they even get the first North American saint there, who's Lily of the Mohawks, right? There she is. All right. The English are going to have a different type of settlement pattern. And the main reason for this that we talked about in chapter 2 is the fact that in England, you could own your own land. And so if you're a English settler, you're going to own, depending on where in North America you're settled, you can own somewhere between a couple hundred to maybe 1,000, maybe even more larger areas of land, acres of land, right? And so the English are going to see a large increase in their population in the 1500s. Mostly due, and this is back in Europe, England's going to see a huge increase in their population, mostly due to the fact that you're going to have improved diets that are going to allow more and more people to reach adulthood. And so the New World, these new English colonies are going to offer a way out of England for lots of people. England, if you're not part of the nobility, not part of the noble class, or not part of the merchant class, there's a lot of poverty during this time frame. And so if you could scrape together enough money for passage to the New World, you can own your own land, which was unheard of in Europe during this time frame, and you could be your own boss. And so the English settlements offer a huge amount of incentive, and you can see the population growth of England in that chart right there, right? To begin with, the English are going to have two different types of settlements. There are two main places of settlements. The first one is going to be the Chesapeake Bay, and this is going to be Virginia, Jamestown, those types of areas, up into what's going to become Maryland, right? The main focus of this area is going to be commercial farming. We're looking to make money. We're growing tobacco, we're growing rice if we can, we're growing indigo, we're growing consumer products that we're going to ship out to England to make money. And then we're going to have the New England colonies in Massachusetts, and this is going to be referred to as the Massachusetts Bay colonies. Places like, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. They're going to be religious settlements, or at least begin with, they're going to be religious settlements. These are going to be the pilgrims. They come over, they want to form that light on the hill, right? The city on the hill to shine God's grace for the rest of the world, right? And so they're looking to make a new life with religious freedom for themselves, and force their religious beliefs on anybody else. Um, at least when they begin the Massachusetts Bay colonies, that's the idea. Shortly thereafter, you're going to see more and more settlers come over and settle in the towns like Boston, and they're going to work in shipping. And then shipbuilding is going to become a major industry in New England because of the amount of the availability of large trees in the forest. And so they're going to build ships for the English Navy and the English merchants. And so we have that. Let's go back to the Chesapeake Bay colonies for a second. The Chesapeake colonies, we're going to grow tobacco, which made tons of money. And we have that. Jamestown starts off. The Jamestown colonies that come over in 1609. Are really a mess to begin with. The first group of settlers, they just go out looking for gold and silver. They expect it to be on the ground or like maybe just barely buried. And so they don't plant food that first year. And so when that winter comes around, um, it's called the starving time because most of Jamestown is they run out of food. They're eating shoe leather and tree bark just to put stuff in their stomachs. But by the early 1600s, 1610, 1614, Jamestown kind of has it figured out. They start to grow corn, they start to grow food to at least feed themselves, and then they plant huge crops of tobacco um, that they hope to turn to sell and make for profits. In 1634, Maryland gets founded, and this is seen. Maryland is a place for religious settlement for Catholics from England, right? And so the Puritans are going to move to New England. The Catholics are going to move to Maryland, named after Queen Mary, and settle there. But they're also going to quickly turn to growing tobacco, right? Tobacco is very labor intensive. It has to be cut and dried, packaged into barrels, loaded on ships, and sent over. And so, to meet this labor need, indentured servants are the first group of people that are going to be used, right? Indentured servants are typically poor people from England that agree to 5 to 7 years of servanthood in exchange for their passage and room and board in the New World, passage to the New World, and then room and board once they get there. And hundreds of thousands of people are going to do this, right? They're going to grow tobacco. They're going to see themselves. They come to the New World. They have very limited freedoms. They're not allowed to marry. They're subject to the temperament and the ideas of the landowners, the people that their servanthood masters. Um, Indentured servants aren't slaves per se, the fact that they could be sold, but they are definitely, they definitely have their freedoms curtailed, right? If they're convicted of a crime, they have additional years put onto their indentured servanthood. Women that come over as indentured servants typically find themselves, mistreated or even raped by some of their owners. And then their servanthood could be sold. And so like you could come over and work for as an indentured servant for Mr. Jones, but Mr. Jones could sell your labor to Mr. Smith. Now he's not selling you per se, but he's selling the agreed upon labor that you're going to provide. Virginia is also going to offer a something called the headright system, which is a system for those that come over to the New World and are able to pay their own way, in which they are given 50 acres of land, and then they're given 50 additional acres of land for every family member or servant that they bring with them. And so, this is a huge amount of land. If you could bring, I don't know, if you could bring 10 people, that's 500 acres of land, and that type of land doesn't exist in Europe. And so the New World is offering this new ability to get your hands on large plots of land, right? So what's going to happen in this Chesapeake Bay area? Well, obviously people are going to settle, they're going to expand, and they're going to find themselves in the middle of the Potawatomi uh, Native American Empire, right? There's about 30 tribes that kind of band together. There's about 20,000 Native Americans that live in Virginia, Maryland area. And we're going to find ourselves in conflict with them almost immediately. In 1609 to 1614, we're going to see the first Anglo-Potawatomi War, in which the English and the Native Americans are going to fight over land and the refusal of the English to give gifts. And this is where we're going to see the emergence of Pocahontas. In which the English are going to capture Pocahontas and they're going to give her as a gift to John Rolfe as that they're going to marry, and then Pocahontas saves John Smith's life, which is a little bit confusing. And anyways, and this marriage between Pocahontas and John Rolfe kind of brings it into the conflict. But of course, you're going to see Pocahontas go over to England and be kind of used as a recruitment tool for more money to be invested into the Jamestown colonies. There's Pocahontas on the left on a pouch of tobacco. She was kind of a marketing tool, I suppose, right? In 1622, after the death of Pocahontas, and further expansion of the native and the English into the native lands, you're going to see the Native Americans attack English settlements again. This time, we're going to have a second war in which that pattern of the Native Americans with that first strike are going to catch the Americans, or the not the Americans, the Europeans off guard and kill large numbers of them. And then the Europeans are going to strike back with overwhelming force and technology, and defeat the Native Americans. Right. Slavery begins in the European colonies in the Caribbean, right? Mostly because of the production of sugar and the amount of labor that a sugar plantation requires, right? By the end of the 1600s, the Chesapeake Bay colony had begun to replace some of the indentured servants with African slaves. Like we said, about 1619 is when slavery comes into North America. At first, when African slaves are brought to North America, they're going to work more as servants and not necessarily as property, right? They could convert to Christianity and work off their purchase price, and then receive their freedom. They could own land. But by the late 1600s, 1690s, 1700s, this idea of granting freedoms to slaves has been replaced with this idea of chattel slavery, in which a slave becomes property for life, right? And so, what is going to be the biggest event? If there's one event in settlement history where we're going to see when we're going to see the European colonies move away from this idea of indentured servanthood to slavery, it's going to be Bacon's Rebellion. All right, so in 1676, we see this rebellion that's going to happen in Jamestown. And so here's the deal. In Jamestown, the governor of Jamestown has a trade relationship with the Native Americans, and so he's buying fur pelts from them and he's shipping them to Europe, and he's making a pretty good profit, right? About every 7 to 10 years, you have more and more indentured servants that are working in the Jamestown area that gain their freedom and they want to go settle new lands. Every time that this happens, they push further and further and further into the lands that are controlled by the Native Americans. All right, we have a guy by the name of Nathaniel Bacon that wants to expand Jamestown into lands that are controlled by the natives. The governor of Jamestown doesn't want that. And so Nathaniel Bacon responds with violence. Basically, he organizes a group of indentured servants, former indentured servants, some slaves, some women, People that are more on the outskirts, I suppose, of the established um, society of Jamestown. And we have a small military conflict in which Bacon actually um, sacks the town of Jamestown, burns it to the ground. Um, the governor of Jamestown sends his wife to England to gather an army. By the time she gets back, most of the fighting is done. But you have this. And Bacon gets arrested. He dies in dies in prison. But what this ultimately does, this Bacon's rebellion, causes the power brokers, the people, the wealthy people of Jamestown to realize that, hey, every 7 to 10 years, every 7 to 14 years, if we keep going with indentured servants, we're going to have to find new places to settle these folks, right? So can we find a labor force that we don't have to replenish every decade? And of course, they're going to turn towards chattel slavery. They're going to turn towards this idea of importing enslaved Africans to come to work at tobacco plantations in Europe or in Virginia, in Jamestown, right? Bacon's followers are mostly poor whites, right? And this is going to encourage that. Bacon's rebellion is going to encourage that movement towards more racially based um, chattel slavery, right? When that happens, and we start to when the settlers of Jamestown begins to import more and more enslaved labor, they're going to put new laws in places to limit the freedoms of freed blacks. One of the first things they do is they prevent gun ownership. They try to limit the amount of people that freed Africans that can meet in one location. And they create harsh punishments for either slaves or former blacks that attack white people or slaves that try to escape. And we're going to create a whole new legal system, um, a whole new set of laws that are going to be applied not only to enslaved Africans but also to freed Africans in North America. The counter to this is going to be the New England states, and I think it's really easy to misconstrue this idea that that there's not slavery in New England, and that's not the case. In the 1600s, there are slaves. In fact, the most famous event that's going to happen in New England is probably the Salem witch trials, and that starts because of a slave from Barbados that was put in charge of watching kids, and they play a voodoo game that came from Barbados, and so like there is slavery in New England. It's just not as widespread as it is in Virginia, and that's not because the Puritans necessarily had an aversion to slavery, which they probably did, but the fact is that in New England, the soil is so rocky and the farms are so small that they couldn't grow huge amounts of cash crops and make money, and so slavery wasn't necessarily economically viable in the New England colonies, right? In the 1620s to 1630s, the Puritans are going to face religious persecution in England. And so they bounce around. They go to the Netherlands for a period of time, and then they decide that they come to America. One of the reasons that they do this is they're against a lot of the social practices of the time of England, like bear baiting. They don't like that. The bear baiting is just where they would chain a bear up to a post, and then they would have it attacked by dogs, and people would, there's no Netflix in the 1600s, and so people would sit around and watch this. They would come to this. It was exciting. They don't like drinking. They upset the kings of England of the fact that they put their authority in God's hands and not in the King of England, and so they're seen as a religious threat to the establishment. There's a picture of bear baiting, right? Um, the first Puritan settlement, we're probably all a little bit familiar with. That's Plymouth, and these are the Pilgrims. And you can read up on that in your notes or on the book. Of course, the Pilgrims are supposed to go to Virginia. They get blown off course. They land in Massachusetts, and they establish their colony there. Right. Um, New New England expects young people to help and support the family, and so like they have these ideas of large families. Some New England communities don't allow outsiders to move in. Some do. Shipbuilding and shipping become that main focus, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, right? The Massachusetts Bay Colony is founded to be the city upon a hill, which is supposed to be this example of good Christian living for the rest of the world. You know, the more and more you read about this and look into it in history, there are some elements of this, but at the same time, Boston is a very secular town, and so like there's some give and take there, and so you can kind of if you want to dig around in history a little bit, you can see that. One of the things that they are going to do, though, as the Puritans, is they believe that reading is very, very important because they want their children to be able to read the Bible and understand the Bible. And so they're going to focus a lot of their attention on education. They're going to be the first groups um, to create a college. The Puritans found Harvard University and in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's still there. Um, while the Puritans come to the New World looking for religious tolerance, they are very religiously intolerant. Anybody that falls out of beliefs with the Puritans are going to, kind of going to feel their wrath. Uh, so we look at Roger Williams, who questioned the taking of the land from the Native Americans, and he gets kicked off and it gets kicked out, and so he goes and founds Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson was a woman who spoke out against the teachings of the church and some of their ideas, and so she gets banished from the Bay Colonies, and she ultimately moves to Rhode Island and then ends up in New York. And when she's killed in 1642, the governor of Massachusetts called this a judgment of God upon her, right? And so, like, you can see that the Puritans are not very, welcoming to other outside ideas. There's Anne Hutchinson, right? The Salem witch trials are going to be part of this. You can read about that in your text. Um, uh, but the biggest thing that we want to touch on here is that Puritans are also going to have the same types of problems that we're going to see in Virginia. As their population grows, the Puritans are going to look to expand into different areas. They're going to try to push um, into some of the Native American lands. And we're going to run into military conflict. We're going to fight something called the King Philip's War, in which the Puritan settlers are going to move into lands that are controlled by the Native Americans, and there's going to be fighting, right? It's going to follow a lot of similar patterns when the Native Americans are going to attack. The first series of attacks are relatively going to be successful, and then the Europeans are going to organize, the Puritans are going to organize and put down the Native Americans with more force and numbers. And so I think one of your one of your assignments this week is to look at the differences and similarities between Bacon's Rebellion and King Philip's War. I would start with the textbook and then branch out from there. But that's what I have for this little lecture, and hope you enjoyed it and stuck with it through the whole thing. And I will see you with chapter 4. Talk to you later. Bye bye.